Dear listeners, I ask you to listen to the story until the very end and be sure to write a review about what you liked and what needs to be changed to make it more interesting for you to listen to my stories. Ambush on Saipan. I still remember the way the jungle smelled that night. Damp earth, rotting wood, something sharp in the air, like metal left too long in the rain. The kind of smell that settles into your lungs and stays there, like a ghost. We were deep in enemy territory, moving slow, careful, every muscle tight with the knowledge that the next step could be the one that got us all killed. It wasn't the first time I'd felt it, but this time was different. This time, I knew we weren't alone. We had been walking for what felt like hours, weaving through thick foliage, our boots sinking into the soft mud. The moon barely cut through the canopy above, turning everything into shifting shadows. No one spoke, not even in whispers. The jungle on Saipan had a way of swallowing sound, making you feel like you were the last living thing on Earth. Except we weren't. I was leading the patrol, 6 men, all of them good, all of them sharp. Corporal Davis was right behind me, his breath steady despite the heat. He was one of those guys who always had a joke ready, always smiling, except tonight. Behind him was Kowalski, big guy, quiet, steady hands. Then McAllister, wiry and fast, always listening. Decker, the youngest, barely out of high school, but sharp as a damn blade. And finally Simmons, our radio man, gripping that damn pack like it was his lifeline. We had been sent to scout enemy movements, see if we could find a supply route the Japanese were using to reinforce their defenses. Intel said there were tunnels, miles of them, carved into the island. The enemy could be anywhere, watching, waiting. That thought kept our fingers tight on our triggers. The first sign of trouble came in the form of silence. The jungle wasn't loud to begin with, but there had been the occasional rustle of leaves, the chirp of some unseen creature. Now nothing, just the oppressive heat and the feeling that we were being watched. My gut twisted. I held up a fist, and the men froze. A whisper of movement, too fast, too close. Then came the first shot. It wasn't loud, not like in the movies. More of a muffled crack, followed by the wet thump of a body hitting the ground. Simmons. One moment he was there, the next he was face down in the dirt, his radio pack crushing him beneath its weight. Blood soaked into the mud. I didn't even hear him breathe. Then all hell broke loose. The second shot followed the first, but this time we were moving. Instinct kicked in before thought. Years of training and too many close calls had taught us that hesitation was a quick way to die. I dove behind the thick roots of a fallen tree, gripping my rifle so tight my knuckles ached. The others scrambled for cover, their movements barely visible in the suffocating darkness. The jungle was alive now, not with the usual sounds of insects and rustling leaves, but with the sharp, deadly cracks of rifle fire, the muffled curses of men trying to keep their voices low, the heavy, panicked breaths of those who knew the next bullet might have their name on it. I forced myself to think. The shots had come from different angles, too precise to be random. That meant one thing: we had walked straight into a trap. The tunnels. They had been waiting for us. They knew we were coming. And now they were hunting us. My heart slammed against my ribs as I glanced around, searching for movement in the shadows. I could barely make out the shapes of my men. Davis crouched behind a rock, eyes scanning the trees. Kowalski flattened against a thick tree trunk, his rifle barrel catching the faintest sliver of moonlight. McAllister and Decker were somewhere further back, their positions hidden, which was both good and bad. Good because it meant the enemy didn't know exactly where they were. Bad because neither did I. Then I saw it, a flicker of movement just beyond Davis, low to the ground, creeping forward like a phantom. A glint of steel in the darkness. A bayonet. The bastard was coming in silent, ready to take Davis from behind before he even knew he was dead. I didn't think. I couldn't afford to. I swung my rifle up, lined up the shot in a split second, and squeezed the trigger. The bullet hit home with a sickening thud, and the figure crumpled soundlessly into the undergrowth. Davis jerked around, eyes wide, then gave me a quick nod. No time for thanks. No time for anything. The jungle erupted again. More gunfire, more movement. This time, I heard the unmistakable clang of metal on metal. Someone was in a fight up close. No more distance, no more cover, just steel against steel, breath against breath. A strangled cry cut through the night, followed by another body hitting the ground. My stomach clenched. I didn't know if it was one of ours or one of theirs. Then, from somewhere behind me, Decker's voice, sharp and urgent but barely above a whisper. "They're in the tunnels. They're coming up behind us." My blood ran cold. I should have seen it. They weren't just attacking from the trees. They were beneath us, moving through the earth like ghosts, using the tunnels to circle around, to pick us off one by one. Simmons had never stood a chance. None of US would unless we moved. I signaled to the others, a quick series of hand gestures that we had practiced 100 times but never under conditions like this. Fall back. Regroup. Move fast, stay low. They understood immediately. No one hesitated. We began to shift, careful, deliberate, but quick. The jungle was an enemy in itself. Branches reaching out to snag uniforms, roots waiting to trip us, shadows playing tricks on the mind. Every step felt like it took a lifetime. Then, just as we were starting to think we might make it out of the kill zone, the ground beneath Kowalski gave way. 1 second, he was there. The next, he was gone, swallowed whole by the earth. There was no scream, no cry for help, just the sudden, brutal absence of him. The tunnels, they were right beneath us. And now, so were the enemy. For a moment, none of us moved. Then a sound, low, guttural, something between a moan and a whisper, rose from the hole where Kowalski had been. Not him. Something else. Something waiting. I felt every hair on my body stand on end. We had to move. No. But then came the worst part, the moment I knew we weren't just fighting men. We were fighting something else entirely. Because the whisper from below wasn't Japanese. It wasn't English. It wasn't anything I had ever heard before. And then, just like that, the whisper stopped. And the real nightmare began. For a moment, there was only silence. A deep, unnatural stillness that swallowed everything. The gunfire, the rustling leaves, even the ragged sound of our own breathing. The jungle felt different, heavier, as if the trees themselves were leaning in, listening. My grip tightened around my rifle, slick with sweat. My mind was screaming at me to move, to run, to do anything but stand there staring into that gaping hole where Kowalski had vanished. But something about it held me frozen, like the darkness itself was reaching up to drag me down with him. Then, from deep within the earth, the whisper returned. It was faint, just a breath of sound, curling up from the tunnel like mist. It wasn't Japanese. It wasn't even a language. It was something older, something wrong. I saw Davis shift uneasily out of the corner of my eye. McAllister's knuckles were white where he gripped his rifle. Even Decker, who never seemed to be rattled by anything, looked like he was ready to bolt. That's when we heard Kowalski scream. It came from the darkness below, echoing up through the tunnel like it had been dragged through miles of twisting corridors. But it wasn't just pain in his voice. It was something else. Something worse. I had heard men scream before, wounded, dying, afraid. But this was different. There was terror in it, real, soul-crushing terror, as if he had seen something down there that should not exist. And then, just as suddenly as it started, the scream was cut off. No gunfire. No struggle. Just silence. That was enough for me. I snapped out of whatever spell had kept me rooted to the spot and gestured sharply to the others. We were getting out of there. Whatever the hell was in those tunnels, whatever had taken Kowalski, we weren't sticking around to find out if we were next. We moved fast, too fast, crashing through the undergrowth with none of our usual caution. I didn't care if the enemy heard us anymore. I didn't care if we were running straight into another ambush. Anything was better than staying near that hole, near that whispering voice from the dark. But the jungle had other plans. The first trap snapped shut around Davis. A loop of razor-thin wire hidden in the undergrowth caught his ankle and yanked him off his feet, hoisting him upside down before he even had time to shout. He hit the air with a strangled gasp, his rifle tumbling from his grip and vanishing into the undergrowth. He twisted wildly, hands scrabbling at his leg, trying to cut himself free before. The shot came out of nowhere. A single, precise bullet that hit Davis square in the throat, silencing him instantly. His body jerked once, then went limp, still swaying from the wire like some grotesque marionette. We didn't stop running. McAllister was the next to go. He had barely made it 10 more steps when the ground beneath him gave way. Another tunnel entrance hidden beneath a layer of loose foliage. He vanished with a choked-off curse, and then he was gone. No scream. No struggle. Just gone. I didn't look back. I couldn't. We were down to 3. Me, Decker, and whatever was left of Simmons' corpse somewhere behind us. My lungs burned. My legs ached. The jungle blurred around me, branches whipping at my face, cutting my skin. I could hear Decker breathing raggedly beside me, his footfalls uneven, panicked. Then, suddenly, the trees thinned. Moonlight broke through the canopy, spilling pale silver over the clearing ahead. I nearly sobbed in relief. Open ground meant visibility. It meant a fighting chance. But the second we burst into the clearing, I knew we had made a mistake. The ground wasn't solid. It was a trap. I felt it give beneath me, the earth shifting, sliding, crumbling away. There was no time to react, no time to grab onto anything. The world tilted, and then we were falling. Into the tunnels. The fall wasn't long, but it felt like it lasted forever. The weightlessness, the cold rush of air, the sheer helplessness of it all. My rifle wrenched from my grip as I tumbled through the dark, slamming into the rough, damp walls of the tunnel, before hitting the ground with bone-rattling force. The breath shot out of my lungs, and for a moment, all I could do was lie there stunned, feeling the weight of the earth pressing down from all sides. Somewhere nearby, I heard Decker groan. He had fallen too, but he was alive. For now, the tunnel was pitch black. The air was thick and stale, smelling of damp rot, rusted metal, and something else, something sickly sweet, like meat left out in the sun too long. I forced myself onto my hands and knees, reaching blindly for my sidearm. My fingers found the grip of my .45, and I clung to it like a lifeline, sucking in deep, shuddering breaths as my heart pounded against my ribs. The sound echoed through the tunnel. Not footsteps, not voices, something else. A slow, deliberate scraping, like nails dragging against stone. My skin crawled. Decker, I whispered, barely able to hear my own voice over the pounding in my ears. You still with me? A pause. Then his voice, shaky but there. Yeah. Where the hell are we? I didn't answer. I didn't know. And right now, that wasn't the most pressing question. The better question was, what else was down here with us? I reached into my pocket, fumbling for the small flashlight I always carried. My fingers were slick with sweat as I clicked it on. The weak yellow beam cut through the darkness, revealing damp, crumbling tunnel walls lined with wooden support beams that looked far too old to be stable. But that wasn't what caught my attention. It was the bodies. They were everywhere. Piled against the walls, slumped in corners, sprawled across the dirt floor. American uniforms. Japanese uniforms. Some stripped down to bare bones, others barely decomposed. Their skins stretched tight over hollow faces, their mouths frozen in silent screams. And then there were the ones in between, the ones that weren't quite fresh, but weren't quite rotted either. The ones that looked like they had been here too long, but somehow not long enough. A breath of air, cold as ice, whispered against the back of my neck. I spun, flashlight jerking wildly. Nothing. But I knew. I could feel it. We weren't alone. Decker saw it before I did. His sharp intake of breath made my blood turn to ice. His flashlight, trembling in his grip, settled on something further down the tunnel. Something that should not have been there. At first, it looked like another body. Another soldier left to rot in the dark. But then I saw it move. Not a twitch. Not a jerk. A slow, deliberate motion, as if stretching for the first time in years. Its head lifted, bones cracking, joints popping. The skin, if you could even call it that, was stretched too tight, too dry, too raw. Its eyes, God help me, its eyes were open. And they were looking right at us. Decker swore, stumbling back, his boots scraping against the dirt. The thing moved again, its mouth opening slowly, as if trying to remember how. And then, in a voice that did not belong to anything human, it whispered, "A name? Kolsky." And then it lunged. I didn't think, I fired. The first shot caught it in the chest, the second in the head. Both should have been kill shots. Both did nothing. The thing jerked back, its body convulsing, but it did not fall. It did not bleed. It did not die. And then, from further down the tunnel, from the darkness beyond the reach of our flashlights, came another sound. More whispers. More movement. We had to get out. No. I grabbed Decker, shoving him toward the tunnel's far end. Go. Move. We ran, the light from our flashlights bouncing wildly against the walls, the whispers growing louder, closer. The tunnel twisted and turned, the walls pressing in, the air growing colder, thicker, as if the very earth was trying to keep us here. My mind was screaming, my muscles burning, but I didn't stop. I didn't dare. And then light. A sliver of pale moonlight ahead. An exit. Decker reached it first, scrambling up the incline, clawing at roots and loose dirt. I was right behind him, pushing myself forward, lungs burning. A hand wrapped around my ankle. Oh, wrong. Not human. I kicked, twisting, my fingers clawing at the dirt. The grip tightened. I could feel it pulling, dragging me back into the dark. My flashlight fell, rolling into the blackness below, its beam flickering wildly across something moving, something rising from the tunnels. Decker grabbed my wrist. "Tom, hold on." I held. I pulled. The thing did too. And then, with one final desperate yank, Decker tore me free. I hit the ground hard, rolling onto my back just in time to see something slither back into the dark. Its shape wrong, its movements unnatural. The whispering stopped. The tunnel went silent. And then the ground collapsed. The earth swallowed the tunnel whole, burying whatever was left inside. The whispers, the bodies, the thing that had taken Kowalski, gone, buried beneath a mountain of dirt and stone. Decker and I lay there, gasping for breath, staring up at the night sky. The jungle was silent again. Just the wind. Just the trees. We didn't speak. There was nothing left to say. By the time we made it back to camp, the sun was rising. We reported the ambush, the losses. We told them about the tunnels, about the enemy. But we didn't tell them everything. Because some things aren't meant to be spoken aloud. And in the dead of night, when the wind is just right, I swear I can still hear it. The whisper, calling my name. 4 weeks after that night, sleep didn't come easy. The jungle never really left us, even when we were back behind friendly lines, even when we were sitting around a mess table, pretending that everything was fine. I closed my eyes and I was back in that tunnel. The cold dirt against my skin, the stale, rotting air in my lungs, the weight of something unseen pressing down on me, waiting. And that voice, Kowalski's name, whispered from lips that should not have moved, from a throat that should not have breathed. Decker wasn't much better. He was always a quiet guy, the type who kept to himself, but after what happened, he got worse. He barely spoke, barely ate. Some nights I'd wake up and see him just sitting there on his cot, staring at nothing, his hands gripping the edge of his blanket so tightly his knuckles went white. I didn't ask him what he saw when he closed his eyes. I didn't want to know. Word spread fast about the tunnels. Not the way we had seen them, not the way we knew them, but enough. Command sent out more patrols, trying to map them, to flush out any remaining Japanese forces hiding beneath the island. But something wasn't right. The men they sent in, they came back different. Those that came back at all. The reports were always the same. The tunnels didn't match the maps. Paths twisted and turned where there should have been straight corridors. Dead ends appeared where exits had been before. Some men claimed they got turned around, lost for hours, even days, before finding their way out. Others swore they heard voices whispering their names, just beyond the reach of their flashlights. The brass wrote it off as combat fatigue, exhaustion, paranoia from too many nights in the jungle. Then one patrol didn't come back at all. A squad of 6 men went in. None returned. Another was sent in to find them. They found weapons, supplies, and blood. No bodies. That was when the higher-ups ordered the tunnels sealed. They dropped explosives, collapsed every known entrance, buried the whole damn network under tons of rock and dirt. It should have been over. Should have ended there. But it didn't. Because the whispers didn't stop. Men in the perimeter watches started reporting things. Shadows moving where there shouldn't be shadows. Footsteps in the undergrowth, pacing just beyond the lantern light. Some swore they saw figures watching them from the tree line. Figures in tattered uniforms, American and Japanese alike, their faces pale, their eyes hollow. One night, a sentry opened fire on nothing. Said he saw Kowalski standing at the edge of the jungle, half in the light, half in the dark. Just standing there, watching. They found the sentry the next morning, rifle still in his hands, staring out into the trees with a look on his face I can't describe, not properly. like he had seen something he wasn't meant to see. His body was cold. His heart had just stopped. No wounds, no signs of struggle. He just died. And that was when I knew. We had never left the tunnels. Not really. Whatever was down there, whatever we had disturbed, it hadn't stayed buried. It had followed us. It had always been with us. And it was waiting. For what? I don't know. But sometimes late at night, when the wind moves just right through the trees, I still hear it. That whisper. Not Kowalski's name. Not anymore. Now it's mine.